Okay, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about what we call the education last mile and what the relationship is, as we see it from our perspective, between education and the modern workforce, which is, of course, the modern economy. But let me tell you a little bit about what I do and sort of my mission in life. It's not just to take dog teams through snowstorms to go to Australia, where it was summer, by the way. Our mission at the Intelligent Community Forum, which I founded, is to energize communities for the 21st century. It's a very simple proposition. This painting that you see was actually done by an artist who happens to be my first cousin in upstate New York. Rochester is the community. He is an educator, teaches art at Webster University, and he has contributed more scholarships for students. His students, I should say, have generated more scholarships for art than any teacher in New York State. So I'm very proud of this, and this is something that he did for us. That phrase underneath, though, is something that is sort of the motivation for why I started my own think tank. It's something our grandfather used to say. And those of you who are of Italian ancestry might recognize it. Those of you who are studying Italian, your kids from Florence might know this one. It's non c'è posto migliore più della mia casa. That's what my grandfather always used to say at night. And what it meant simply is there's no place like home. At the end of the day, what we ultimately want is to be able to go home at night, close the door behind us, look up at whatever we look up at, and say, I'm really glad I live here. That is a universal characteristic, a universal experience that people have no matter where we go. And many of us who grew up in wonderful small towns, places around the world, I grew up in upstate New York, witnessed the fragmentation of those places. And it was always my wish to find out what exactly happened to my hometown. It became, a place that was very challenged socially. And so we've spent a lot of time, and originally a lot of my own money, which made my wife really happy, trying to bring together the smartest people that we could find to have a dialogue on what happened to my community, but ultimately, how do we build communities for the 21st century? I think it's the single greatest challenge that we have as a human community, and I also think if we can figure it out, we will solve most of the problems that we wrestle with in isolation. I think community is at the heart and the soul of the things that we are challenged by in the 21st century. So I've committed us to understanding how to build better ones in the 21st century, and I'm just so delighted to be standing in the middle of one of the great ones. Let me tell you a little bit about the forum and how we approach this. We are a think tank, and we've decided that we would study the impact of technology, access technologies, which are broadband, telecommunications, satellite, and all that stuff, on economic and social development at the community level. And for the reasons I cite. I think communities are where all of the change is going to take place, politically, economically, and even academically in the 21st century. I said in New York, and I get a lot of email and editorial stuff on this, I think national governments are failing us. I don't think that they are capable anymore of delivering to us what we as tribal beings need. But we can rely on our communities. We can rely on each other, and home is the most important place. And so I see most of the innovation actually coming from leaders like Dana McDaniel, mayors around the world, people like yourselves at the community level. That's really where most of the innovation in government and most of the innovation in other endeavors is coming today. So it's a very, very exciting place for me to be. What we decided to do to identify this was to create an annual awards program. If you sit down and you tell somebody, how important broadband is and talk about some of the technical aspects of it, you put them right to sleep. But once you have a beauty contest, right, everybody loves a beauty contest. Now, most mayors look terrible in a bikini, so we don't go there. But what we do is we develop an awards program where we get over 400 submissions every year from communities around the world. And as Dana alluded to, we choose 21 of them. We'll do that in a couple of weeks. I'll be in Suwon, South Korea to do that. We go from 21 to 7. Those are our top 7. That's sort of our elite group. And we named them in Hawaii in January. I'm no idiot. I go to Hawaii in January, right? One of the virtues of having your own enterprise. Those 7 are then invited to New York, and in June, the early part of June, as they are the stars of a 3-day show, and one of them is named the Intelligent Community of the Year. So that's our awards program. What it really is, though, is a sneaky way for us to gather data on over 400 communities every year, and so we can study them, because that's really what we want to do here. What we have is a summit, which we call Building the Broadband Economy, in affiliation with New York University's Polytechnic School. So again, that's something that is a physical dialogue where we invite 250 people, including our top 7, to come and to talk about why they are as good as they are. We do research and publications. Perhaps some of you have read our white papers or our studies. We've just got a new one out called Health and the Intelligent Community. And we also produce workshops that we take around the world into communities to tell them what it means to be an intelligent community and how you get there. And we also do special symposiums, and I consider this a symposium. So that's kind of how we're structured and what we do for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We've developed empirical criteria to define an intelligent community. We thought it was important back in 2001 to take a look at 6 communities originally and to see what the common characteristics were for each of them. And as a result of that, over the years, we have developed 5 basic criteria. And now this is important when we start talking about education and how it enables jobs and creates the workforce for the 21st century, because all these things sort of have to work together. The first criteria is broadband. You have to have access technologies today in your community. You have to have that infrastructure. You really can't go anywhere without the modern railroad. And it's interesting to me that in the United States we still argue about whether the public sector should be involved in broadband. It would be kind of like in the 19th century, you know, communities arguing about whether they needed the railroad. Because when you think about it, broadband and these access technologies that are around today are like the railroad. They are the railroad. The only difference is that the railroad brought physical cargo from where you were. You could put your stuff on there if you were a business person and bring it out to the rest of the country or the rest of the region and distribute it to markets that were on the path of the railroad. It's the same thing today, except with the internet and broadband, the cargo is information. And that is the raw material that creates the wealth of the 21st century. So that's a fundamental criteria that any intelligent community needs to have. And Dublin, of course, has a fantastic railroad called Dublink. You have to have a knowledge workforce. You know, Peter Drucker wrote famously 60 years ago that by the end of the 20th century, you could not find your way into the middle class if you worked in manual labor. It would be virtually impossible for an entire economy to have a middle class existence if they were working with their hands. You know, Ronald Reagan famously told Moscow University back in the 80s that the days of brawn over brain were over. That this was the age where the brain would take over and become what was essential to human endeavors, human labor. Knowledge workers are key to a community's future. People who work with information. The third criteria is innovation, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that today because I think that is probably the link in the last mile that we're talking about here. And when I talk about innovation, I mean innovation in the private sector, of course, but also innovation in the public sector. As I say, our governments have to be responsible and responsive. And what we see here and in other intelligent communities is that governments are becoming very innovative as well, and they are figuring out ways to allow citizens to be more productive knowledge workers, to be more productive human beings. I sat down with the mayor of Gangnam, our friend Mr. Maying, a couple of years ago. He's a graduate of the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and I like him very much, aside from the fact that he's a Red Sox fan. But what he did for me was to lay out a whole scenario about his investment in e-government platforms in Korea. Of course, they have a very sophisticated e-government platform there. You can take the subway there, go to a kiosk on the subway platform and get the deed to your home if you're going to your lawyer's office for 30 cents. I mean, they've got systems like that there. And I said, why did you go to such an extreme to build this very sophisticated platform on government dollars? And he said, and he worked it out for me mathematically. And what it came down to, and I'm paraphrasing it, is for every 2 hours that I can save someone from interfacing physically with the government, which they don't like anyway, he said that's another hour that they can be productive at work, thinking about new ideas to move Korea forward. And it's also another hour that they can spend with their family or their church or their Buddhist temple or some mission that will improve the quality of life in my community. He had this thing figured out to the T. Very, very innovative local government. So you need that to be an intelligent community. Digital inclusion. Of course, we have a moral mandate to not leave the least among us behind. But there's more to it than that, bringing other people in the community along. We have a unique condition. This is the first time that I can think of in many centuries when we can really close the gap between rich and poor, information rich and information poor. The information economy allows that. Anybody who has access to information, knows how to innovate, has the opportunities, can rise. In the last 17 years in Asia alone, 1 billion people have moved from abject poverty to what we would consider lower middle class standards. We can do this stuff. We can close the digital divide and eliminate the problems that have historically beset us when we created two classes of people. I also think digital inclusion is important for the tribe, and I use the phrase tribe a lot, for mentoring purposes. I was in Eindhoven, Holland, and they have a wonderful system where seniors are left in their homes but are given a lot of technology around them, including video, where they can interact with a nursing center 24 hours a day if they want, and also do video conferences with people like myself. I mean, I physically visited the place, but later I had a video conference with an elderly gentleman who had been a salesman for a printing company. And I had a dialogue with him about his past, you know, World War II and that in Europe, but also about raising money, because he was a great salesman. And he gave me all these techniques and tips for doing it. Basically, he started off by saying, the best thing is you have to be like this. But as he elaborated, I realized I would not have had access to this level of mentoring without the technology that was available and consciously put in by the community. I consider that a form of digital inclusion because I could learn from one of my tribal elders, so to speak. So I think that's an important criteria, and it's the fourth one that we identify when someone wants to be an intelligent community. Fifth one is marketing. You have to be able to tell your story. Dublin, you know, I'm a representative of Dublin now because they were one of my top 7 communities. Wherever I go around the world, people ask me, wow, Ohio, I thought it was just a rust belt. I thought people were leaving in droves. You know, I didn't think anything was going on. I thought there were a lot of rednecks out, you know, all these perceptions. And I said, well, you know, I got a community of about 43,000 people you could come to because it's like a spaceship to the future. But they didn't know that. Now they know it because of us and because of other people who have been telling your story. You have to tell your story. We are storytellers. And perception is very, very important. How you learn depends a lot on how you absorb stories and how stories are told to you. And that's a very, very important criteria. There's also marketing advocacy, advocating internally what you do and doing it with each other. Again, I'll get into this a little bit later, but you have to continue to tell your story to yourselves. You have to know how good you are and where your strengths are and what you're accomplishing. You can't live without that kind of hope. No one can. It's impossible. Hope is the drug that keeps us alive. And it comes for free. You don't have to go to a pharmacy to get it. So that's how we do it. And that's how we define an intelligent community. As Dana said, last year, Dublin made the world's top 7 list of intelligent communities. And this is actually not a very good picture, I'm afraid. But this is a picture of you and I doing the conversation in New York.
You got my worst side.
And actually, what I was doing here was I was asking you, how could you tell me that you had nice weather in February, and then I get out there and you have a snowstorm? But the way Dublin was judged, by the way, the way we do this is we have a quantitative research company in India that does assessments, and then we have a jury that does our assessments. But for the top 7, we have a group of academics also who evaluate. So, and they come up with very, very specific quantitative criteria. I see Nancy Richardson back there. But we drive them nuts, evidently, asking for so much data. But hopefully, at the end of the day, it's worth it, because obviously, you prove your mettle. Why Dublin in 2010, though? These are my criteria. I don't judge my intelligent communities. We have third parties that do that. But I read all the submissions, of course, and I visit the places, and I have great conversations with them. Here's what I like about Dublin. Here's what I like about you guys. You have the broadband access issue resolved. Dublink, one of Dana's babies here, you've built the railroad, and that will serve you well for at least a generation or two to come. I don't know why, but a lot of places in the United States, including our national government, can't figure out that broadband is important. President Obama, God bless him, he allocates, I think, $7 billion or something in stimulus money for broadband. $600 million for education, whatever it is. We shouldn't be having this discussion. On a per capita basis, Suwon, South Korea, Stockholm, Sweden, Eindhoven, Holland, and probably Dublin, on a per capita basis, spend more to build the infrastructure of the future that is going to create wealth than the federal government does. That issue's been resolved here. It's been resolved in Sweden. It's been resolved in Korea. Pick an economy that's leading in the economic indexes. Singapore, Taipei. They are not having this discussion about whether broadband is necessary, and thank goodness you're not having it in Dublin. They are having it in Washington, and I think that's a terrific problem. There are reasons for that, which I can get into if anybody's interested. But I'm talking about why I like Dublin, not why I hate Washington. That's one place, boy, I tell you, I'll go to a time zone in Australia before I go to Washington in my same time zone. I get more tired there listening to people than any place else. Local government and economic development are focused enablers here. This is a place where local government absolutely knows its role and performs accordingly. Economic development group here is outstanding. Your taxing structure for getting things done, your SIP programs and all of those things really enable you to build the type of community that I find admirable. As we know from this room and from this workforce summit, there's collaboration across sectors and disciplines. There's no siloing here. I give Dana McDaniel a lot of credit for that. He is just, a guy who evidently doesn't get much sleep because he's just running around, knocking down silos all the time. And that is such an important characteristic for the 21st century, especially when we start talking about building workforces, because the new workforce is going to be fed by a lot of different disciplines in a community, including local government, including the academic sector. So I love the collaboration here. It's just wonderful. There's also a strong sense of identity and competitiveness. The sense of identity, of course, comes from all the green around here. The Irish heritage always makes an Italian uncomfortable, but I think it's important for team building. And the competitiveness factor. I mean, you see yourselves as a community. You don't see yourselves as sort of the suburb that's morphed onto Columbus. As a matter of fact, I think in a lot of ways with OCLC, the supercomputer, CORN, and some of those programs, you're actually dictating the dialogue to some of these bigger communities. And that's a leadership position that is consciously being taken here. And I love it. You incubate, you're incubating companies at DEC. You leverage the various components of the community. I mentioned corn and things like that. And you build. Dana just laid out for you a vision for a learning center for the 21st century. You're not afraid to take that step and to build things that are new, facilities like this, to bring people together. That is not as common as you may think in communities. I also like the 3 yards in a cloud of silicon mentality that occurs here. You know, it's like from Ohio State, the old days in football, right? You run the ball, you wear the other guy out, but you just keep moving down the field. And you're doing that with the digital age economy and with new thinking about how to evolve a workforce. So you're persistent that way, and I think the perception of Ohio is that that is what made Ohio great. They are just persistent in moving forward. Now, again, you know, our award is a nice thing. It gets international recognition. I'm very proud of it. My mother's very proud of it. She said, geez, thank God my kid's finally got a job. He's doing something useful. Rich Dusome said the same thing. But we look at what other people say about you, too. And when Fox Business News says you're the best city in the United States to do business, that's a big deal to us. That means that something's going on here, and I can't wait to get out here and to look at it and to have other people look at it. So that's why Dublin. But I'm going to keep going here, but I wanted to set that up for you. Let's talk about some global issues now that are impacting workforce development everywhere. We're in a situation now where every worker here, San Francisco, Canada, wherever it is exposed to wage and skill competition from workers in similar industries worldwide. We've flattened that out. And so, you know, you're competing now not with people, you know, in Sandusky or not with people, you know, in Canton. You're competing with people in Tianjin. You're competing with people in Vietnam. You're competing with people in Piraí, Brazil. That's what's happened to the global workforce. That's a big, big change. We've seen a significant decline of manufacturing as a job generator with a corresponding decline in wages for unskilled and low-skilled workers. David Brooks wrote a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times that we've essentially got, you know, two classes of people, those who, you know, are educated to the high school level and those who continue their education. And the numbers over a 20-year period, we reported this information last year. Over the course of 20 years, the earning differential is $1.4 million between those categories. Again, the decline in one form of economic wealth building and the rise of another is quite profound. And we also are, and Brooks's article actually alluded to this, we see a lot of the social pathologies, you know, the obesities, the alcoholism, the divorce rate, higher among those groups that we used to consider middle-class people working in honorable manual labor. We've seen a rise in the minimum skill level required to earn a living wage. University presidents and participants out there and trade school presidents, you know, listen very closely. The skill levels that are going to be required to be knowledge workers are rising almost at a disproportionate rate. And I'm not so sure all the time that our educational systems are keeping up. We've done great, you know, in the private sector economy. I mean, you go to a place like Research in Motion up in Canada, and you look at the campus up there and how they produce products and workers and innovate and educate their people in a private sector environment. And then you look at the educational system that tries to match and to, you know, put people across that border. It doesn't really match up. The educational systems are still kind of operating on an agricultural or industrial age model. The idea that people still pay $42,000 a year to go to 4 years of school and think their education is over, those days are over. That's the 9th century. We're not operating on that model. At Algonquin College, they've got a 30-year program where you can pay for your education at a university, but it pays for 30 years of education. It spreads out the cost, but it takes into consideration the fact that you're probably, and you and your children especially, are going to be working between 6 to 9 jobs over the course of their career. Half of those jobs are probably going to be businesses that they start. So we've got to accommodate that at the educational level. You know, we're not a nation that, you know, is harvesting the crops in the summer less than 3% of the American workforce works on farms now. That's a pretty famous statistic. So again, that's something to be mindful of. That increased insecurity of employment as businesses go global in search for skills and market access, I think is just going to be with us for a long time. We have to redefine what it means to be secure in work. And there's an emotional component to that. All of these dynamics have created significant social stresses. And again, you can see them playing out around the world. When manual labor ceases to be a route to middle-class prosperity, what it means is that my grandfather couldn't come here from Italy and work on the railroad in a small town in upstate New York and raise 11 kids. He would be living on the street today. But he could do it back then. But again, how do we accommodate that transition? The established centers of political and social power have lost their economic base. Trade unions, fewer than 16% of American workers now are in trade unions. Clubs, ethnic clubs, all different types of groups where we got together are sort of being transformed. A lot of it's going online now. Facebook is the 4th largest nation population-wise in the world. Houses of worship, I think we've seen a decline in our embrace of the universal values that propagated a lot of how this country was formed and a lot of how its economy was formed. That stress is being felt. And nonprofits. I'm not so sure that nonprofits are declining. I'm beginning to see a rise in social businesses, in new forms of nonprofits, feeding themselves into the workforce, into the economy. But you can follow me when I talk about how some of these traditional centers have been stressed. And I think cultural and religious traditions are challenged by primarily mobility and dislocation. In order for a tribe to think alike, a tribe has to spend many, many generations together, sharing the same stories, embracing the same message, believing in the same systems. And again, that has economic consequences. When a tribe, when a people feel happy, their economic performance is greater. We've had a couple of Nobel Prizes now awarded on to economists who have been studying what is called gross domestic happiness. As a matter of fact, I don't know if any of you read this, the nation of Bhutan doesn't measure gross domestic product anymore. They actually measure gross domestic happiness. They want to see how happy their people are. And I think you can probably jinx the data by running up behind people and tickling them when you do the data. But it's a serious issue because, again, the idea that collectively, when we are content, when we have a common belief system, when we know where we're going, when we're sure that our children will do well, we tend to perform better economically. So again, we need to recalibrate that when we reconfigure our educational systems and even our workforces, and especially our communities. There's good news here, obviously, or else I wouldn't be doing this. We live in the most, I think, unique time that I can imagine, in that for the first time in human history, so far as I know, and I've asked a lot of people, you can live anywhere you want and participate in a global economy and a global dialogue on any subject that appeals to you. Those two conditions have never existed at the same time before in the human experience. I think that's a great opportunity. The key is to make sure that where you're living is where you want to live, and that you have the access technologies that enable you to participate fully in this global economy, in this global experience. Every community now has that opportunity to use broadband for economic and social development. The challenge, the problem, one of the challenges is that more people are moving to cities, which are going to be largely unsustainable over the next 30 years. When I was in China, they were telling me that Shanghai is going to have 49 million people by the year 2030. And I think that's a lot of people, that's a lot of pizza to deliver. But I don't know how that's going to be sustained, because what's happening is you're depopulating the countryside, you're taking those traditional Confucian cultures, you've got young people, mainly men, leaving their families, leaving their parents, leaving their systems behind, going to cities, finding work, living relatively isolated lives though, finding work, And as long as you've got a 15% GDP nationally and can absorb them, it's going to work out for you. They're going to have jobs. But guess what? If that GDP tips, and it will someday, to 5, 6%, you've got 27-year-old men with a lot of testosterone living in crowded conditions in an unsustainable city away from the values and the virtues of places where they have contributed for generations. I think that's a cataclysm. And I see it playing out in a lot of different places. So, you know, we have an opportunity to arrest that worldwide. One of the things that we see happening, of course, and you know, you guys have addressed this very well, is that small and mid-sized companies are the primary producers of job growth. I think the average company here employs, I think, 7 people, something like that. So you've kind of got that right. And you understand that there are global trade opportunities that, you know, once were just the domain of the big corporations. And I think that's a terrific opportunity today for companies, especially companies that are based in places like Dublin. Individuals and businesses gain access to the global community of vendors competing for their business. That drives down costs. We call that crowdsourcing. In other words, you can work with vendors around the world on an information design product that you have and lower costs. So, you know, again, if you're an entrepreneur, a businessman like I am, that's an important thing. That's a big deal. I love that children and adults can go global in search of education and culture, knowledge and collaboration. No better way to build a peaceful world than to have dialogue among the young. Web-based tools will increase community involvement and service. In a lot of our intelligent communities, the most visited website is the community portal now. People learning about what their government is up to, what's happening in their community. That's been a significant element in tying people together. And finally, innovation has become as important as location, resources, or capital in creating opportunity for success. In other words, nobody needs to be in the middle of nowhere, right? I never said I lived in the middle of nowhere. People would ask me, where do you live? I live in a very small town, which actually was in the middle of nowhere. But I always said, I live in Lyons, New York. I come from Lyons, New York. And today, people can live in small places like that, and they do not need to feel that they're in the middle of nowhere. This is probably un-American, but the age of the economic refugee hopefully will come to a close someday. Because people, like my grandfather, shouldn't need to leave their communities just for economic reasons, because they leave so much behind. You know, and frankly, if you were born in Italy, why the heck would you ever want to leave Italy? But he did it for economic reasons. Kids want to go and experience Australia, experience other parts of the world, great, but not purely for economic reasons. We can arrest that, because there is not a zero-sum game when someone leaves their country and comes to the United States or Canada or one of those places. We gain, but the rest of the world, those other places, are stripped of resources because the best and the brightest have gone somewhere else. We've got to rebalance that, and I think we can. Innovation is key, though, and I want to talk about that a little bit, and that's how I'm going to sort of close here today and see if we can talk about the bridge, the last mile between education and the workforce. This is Picasso, by the way, Pablo Picasso. I put him up here for a reason. IBM just did a poll of 1,500 CEOs. Maybe some of you were polled, or CEOs of Cardinal or Wendy's or some of these companies. And they asked the CEOs, what is the #1 leadership competency characteristic going forward for companies? In other words, what are CEOs and senior managers required to be? What is the #1 competency that they expect in order for their companies to be successful in the near future? And you know what they answered? First time they had ever answered this. Anybody see that poll? The #1 leadership competency, creativity. Right? And you think of CEOs, right? These are men and women who are, driven by Wall Street, quarterly reports, shareholder dividends, mergers and acquisitions, brutally competing in a tough, tough world, managing departments, all this stuff. They said that in order to lead, in order for this company to move forward, our company to move forward, creativity was the most important competency. That tells you volumes about how the workforce has changed, and again, how we need to be educated to address it. That's why I put Picasso up here. Picasso, if you know anything about him, was endlessly creative, endlessly restless to create new things all the time. And people will say, well, he was an artist, that's what artists do. No, he was just endlessly inquiring all the time about beauty and truth and productivity. And he wanted to make money. He made a lot of money, right? That's a competency that we all have. It's a natural resource that we all have always had, but we have never been encouraged, if we're in the business sector, to necessarily explore it. And we don't really find ourselves being encouraged often in the educational experience to think like Picasso, to be endlessly innovative, endlessly creative. And yet in Ohio, you have the Inventors Hall of Fame. You have people who thought like Picasso, made this a great state, and by consequence, made their communities great places, their nation a great place. Creativity, innovation, is the last mile that needs to be crossed between the educational system and the workforce in the 21st century. And I hope that's somebody calling to agree with me. How does this take place? Well, I use a phrase, cultural environmentalism. That's part of my new tribalism concept. This is from a book, a wonderful book called Everything is Illuminated. And it says that the great advances are made not by individuals so much as by environments. It is not a coincidence that innovations tend to come in clusters or bundles. So in other words, this is not about the individual, the Bill Gates or the Picasso or the lone inventor, the Edison in the lab, inventing something and whole industries being spawned. That's really not how it works. It's about creating intelligent communities, environments, places like DEC, places like your colleges here, that create environments that enable clusters, that enable different types of innovations and ideas to emerge, which then become monetized and become producers of jobs. So what's being talked about here when Dana talks about this learning center concept is an environment that is planting yet another seed. As Dana said, he doesn't really know, the city council doesn't really know what's going to come of this collaboration across the various disciplines here, nor should they know right now. I'm glad they don't know. I'm really glad, because when they say what it's going to be, that scares me. What it is a blank canvas. But Picasso, he took a blank canvas. He did some amazing things with it. There's a story where some couple paid him like $150,000 to do a drawing, actually it was. And a couple of months passed, and he's, Pablo, where's my drawing? Where's my drawing? And Picasso, he didn't say anything. And finally, they were together, and they said, Pablo, where's my drawing? Picasso took out a piece of paper, took out a pen, $150,000. The guy said, but that only took you 20 seconds. Picasso said, that took me 40 years. That's the environment. That's what can be produced. With regard to universities, there's a phrase from Daniel Patrick Moynihan that I like to quote. He said, "How do you create a great city?" And the answer was, you build a great university and wait 200 years. We can't wait that long. So we have to keep creating entrepreneurial centers. We have to continue to look at our educational infrastructure to see how we can enable a great city, maybe not tomorrow or maybe not in 5 years, but certainly for the next generation. And that has to be transmitted to the best and the brightest and to the young people here so that they know that this culture is being reinforced through innovation, and that there are going to be places here where they can start businesses and do great things, and to do what I did, to start a social business, to hopefully make a difference and to answer questions. Because the fundamental goal of education is to teach inquiry, to allow people like me to have a forum to ask questions and to find answers. I think if you reduce it to that, you've identified the mission of any educational institution, even a trade school. How do you solve a problem? So I think there are 7 challenges for innovation-based communities, because I think innovation is at the core of this. The first is to get broadband and social media, but don't fall in love with the technology. I've worked in the satellite business for the last 20 years or so. This is kind of how we formed ICF, working with a group of satellite executives, actually. I don't love satellites per se. I know the technology inside out. I think it's one of the most remarkable technologies ever designed by a human being, to put something up there 23,000 miles in a geostationary orbit, of which 3 of them can cover the footprint of the Earth and bring the Sopranos into your living room on demand. What a great technology, right? But what's good is that it can cover the footprint, its footprint can cover the world. That means to me that we can connect everybody. I don't fall in love with the technology, I fall in love with what it can do. Same thing with social media. I don't need to tweet every 15 seconds, but I love the idea that I can communicate with people and form like-minded communities. I have a nephew, he's 17 years old, he formed a Facebook page, and he and his friends are they're devout, they're passionate about religion. They're studying the history of the Catholic Church. These are young kids. I learn more from them on their Facebook page than I do from my parish priest. So I think it's purposeful. You have to stay open rather than closed. There's a reason Sweden is successful as an economy. They built, no, it's not because of that. I saw 3 people smiling. No, that's not why Sweden is successful. That's why it's fun. The reason it's successful is that they built an open access telecommunications network. The city went in, kind of like Dublin, put in an open network and allowed anybody to connect to it. Information flows in and out of that community freely. You see, to quote Senator Moynihan again, technology is not a secret, it's a system. The reason the Soviet Union fell, well, there were a lot of reasons why, but one of them was they thought that they could steal secrets and build a modern economy, that they could take secrets and not build an environment, not build a culture around innovation, even though they had one in their sciences. And it depends on the free flow of information. China will never be a great superpower as long as it keeps choking off Google, as long as it keeps telling people who want to practice religion and freedom of expression for ideas that they have to think twice. You don't think twice with innovation. Innovation is lightning. It happens once, and you have to have a culture to capture it. And again, that's what's being built in Dublin. I always say produce a community bucket list. If this community were to vanish, more likely if you were to vanish tomorrow, what would you want to leave behind? What would the legacy be here? Do that now, and try to check off that bucket list. Real important one. I think Dave Baldwin and I were talking about this a little bit before the speech here. Understand the nonlinear. Again, the problem I have with the American educational system, a lot of educational systems, is that we think linearly. We go from point to point to point, and that's kind of how we've structured our thinking. In order to be knowledge workers, in order to be Picasso workers, if you will, you have to think in a nonlinear sense. And there are different ways of doing that. But again, a center for learning that has as its proposition, creating something, by its very nature lends itself to, as the cliche goes, out-of-the-box thinking. But it's about being nonlinear. It's almost like, daydreaming. It's almost like me sitting with my grandmother, and I think back to that now. I'm a 9-year-old kid, and I'm sitting in her house, and she's giving me coffee and cookies. I'm 9 years old, by the way. Coffee, right? And she's asking me all these questions. What do you think God looks like? What do you think would happen if we took that fig tree and we planted it on Mars? All these sort of improbable propositions. And I realized that she was giving me the confidence to think non-linearly, to have crazy answers if I wanted to. We would do this. This was a regular exercise for us. She loved to do this. She's a very creative woman. And I always think back and I say, was it because I was so caffeinated and sugar-highed that I love the creative endeavors in my life? Or was it because I was trained to think non-linearly and be confident enough to pursue that thinking? I think it's important for an innovation-based community. And then I have my own 3 rules of the universe that I think are important for communities to remember. My observation is that institutions, like people, generally get into trouble, and you can identify that problem. You can almost do an analytic on it when one of 3 things occur. So if you want to know if you're in trouble, or if your company or your educational system or your community's in trouble, think of one of 3 things. Are we communicating properly? Actually, let me go into these. I think I've got them for you here. Yeah, here we go. I'll reverse that. When we're resisting change, we usually have problems. You see it in relationships, right? People stay together because they can't change, but the relationship won't work. That could be a relationship in business, it could be a relationship, personal relationship. It's the same with communities. You resist change, you're defying a physical and physiological principle of life. You know, the first noble truth of Buddhism is that we suffer. That's what Buddha said. That was his great contribution, the 4 noble truths. Second one is, I've identified the cause of suffering. The third is that the cause of suffering is attachment. We're resisting. That's why we're suffering. You can't resist change. It's a universal characteristic, so you have to kind of keep working to overcome it. Communicate effectively. Remember I said the 5th criteria was marketing and advocacy? You have to communicate. You know, we do so much head-down work that somehow we think that what we're thinking is being communicated. Only guy that could do that was Dr. Spock with the Vulcan mind meld. We can't do that. We have to keep communicating. And it has to be a constant process. You have to keep telling your own story. You have to keep asking questions. You'll be in trouble if you're not communicating, and again, that's a great way to identify one challenge you may have when you're trying to innovate. The most important one, I think, is remember why you're here and what your ultimate mission is. One of the challenges of the 21st century is we've lost common principles. There are universal principles that can be adhered to. And even within an organization, every company, every organization, every educational system has its mission statement. When someone tells me in my organization, even the ICF, which we're pretty good at staying on mission, what are you going to do today? I'm going to answer my email. I say, shut off your computer. That's not why you're here. You're not here to answer your email. You're here to make communities better in the 21st century. Don't forget the mission. I can't tell you how many people in any walk of life walk through that door in the morning and forget why they're here. Once you do that, you're kind of lost. You're not going to be as energized for innovation, for anything, for love, for relationship. So, you know, it's not a hard thing to do, but it's, you know, if you can't remember yourself, I encourage communities to call us. We'll tell you why you're here. You know, you're here to innovate and to create a better place for your children. Okay. What is Dublin's mission? Well, I think we're going to be talking about that over the next couple of minutes or hours. I think you've said it nicely in one of the ads where you kindly mentioned the ICF, I think. You want to produce smart ideas, smart workers, and a smart city. I think that's very noble. And again, I think great things can happen. And I can tell you, you know, personally that when you define the mission for yourself and you stay on it, wonderful things can happen. And one of the greatest things that has ever happened to me, something I checked off my bucket list, was something that happened to me a couple of weeks ago in Stockholm. I was invited over there for an ICF event that they produced. The mayor did a very nice thing for us, produced a conference to talk about creating workers for the service economy. And what he really invited me for was because he was running for re-election, and he kind of wanted to have his picture taken with an ICF person, I think. But having said all of that, they produced a tremendous event. It's a great city. They were our Intelligent Community of the Year in 2009, but the event where I spoke was in City Hall. And I don't know, some of you have been to Stockholm, I think. Jackie and some others have been there. And if you've been through City Hall, you know that that's where they give out the Nobel Prize. There's a room where there's a huge limestone podium that overlooks a floor where 1,000 people are dined every December. Obviously, the pathway to the best and the brightest of human civilization are there. And at one point, I was speaking in the room that they have off to the side there, and I looked out, and I saw that podium. They don't let you stand up there unless, you know, you're the Dalai Lama or Elie Wiesel or Dr. Paul Nurse or one of the laureates. And I looked, and I just, first of all, I couldn't believe I was there. And I had this realization that this is the place where human beings in communities were gathered because they had made a choice. They had made a choice to go this way with their human life. You know? They could have gone a lot of different directions. They could have taken easy paths, probably a lot of them, because it's a lot of work, I suspect, to get to that level in life. And yet here I was in a place where, almost like a temple, where humanity had collectively made that choice and where they were honored. And afterwards, they gave me a private tour, and I asked, I said, can I just touch it? I just wanted to touch that podium. You know, and you know, very nice people. They said, yeah, of course. Have you washed your hands? And I got there, and I put my hand on it, and I thought, English major, thought about 1950, William Faulkner, great American author, got on that podium and he said, mankind will not only endure, mankind will prevail. I said, yeah, I get it. So I come to a place like Dublin, I see you prevailing, and I wish you luck going forward. Thanks a lot.